Check out the Confessions of a Genocidal Madman Savior by Rick and Alice Valentine. Available now on Amazon.com.
My dreams were turbulent last night, with visions from the far distant past swimming up from the murky gray depths of my memory to revisit upon me a world that I would have preferred to remain forgotten. At least the dream started out pleasantly enough, with me sitting at a bar, flirting with a beautiful woman. The music of the era simmered through the air as we sat sipping microbrews and laughing at each other's jokes. It was a moment I could have dwelt in forever, but of course, that was not to be. With a disjointed lurch in dream time, we suddenly found ourselves outside, walking hand in hand along a bustling street that was lined with clubs and bars. The air had a holiday feel to it, with revelers spilling out to fill the sidewalks. Was it New Year's Eve? Or Mardi Gras, maybe? The world lurched once more as the woman yanked me back against a wall, wrapping her fingers in my hair and pulling my lips down to hers. It was such a pleasant dream. Still locked in her sweet embrace, the world around us suddenly began to change. At first it was just an obscure sense of dread. But as we turned back toward the crowd, the lighting seemed to dim ominously. In the distance a man stumbled and fell to the sidewalk in obvious distress. A few moments later, a woman near us collapsed as well, and she was followed by yet another person shortly after that. In no time, couples up and down the street were struggling desperately to support their mortally stricken mates as the epidemic spread. The woman's hand I was holding convulsed spasmodically in mine, seconds before she crumpled to the ground, her hand sliding limply from my grip. It is the same nightmare that has haunted me ever since I unleashed my virus upon the world, a mixture of my inner doubts, self-loathing, and guilt from which I simply cannot seem to escape. Nonetheless, I did what had to be done, then even as now. It used to be said that history is written by the victors. Now they say that history is written by the survivors. They're all wrong. History is written by the manipulator, by those with the power to shape the world to their will. That may seem nefarious to you, as it once did to me, but if changes are made for the greater good of the people or planet by someone with more knowledge than they, is it not for the best? Frankly, I don't care what you think. Live through what I have and then see how you view things. These are the first-hand accountings of how the world changed, as no one else knows. These are the facts of how I sculpted the world around us, to stave off the imminent destruction of all human life. Well, I should clarify that a bit. I saved what humanity has changed into. I should probably start from the beginning. The problems of the world were coming to a head early in my life. The environment was crumbling, economies were falling into chaos, and religious and political differences were ripping society apart. I started out working towards being an environmental scientist, intent on repairing what damage I could. I quickly saw the futility of any environmental efforts, however, as most of the ideas that could have made a real difference to the world were either ignored or suppressed outright. Changing careers. I started to study biochemistry with future plans that I couldn't discuss at the time with anyone. I was always a quick study when it came to the sciences, and after a decade of experimentation, I finally found what I was looking for. It was something both diabolically deadly and incredibly simple at the same time. What I created was beautiful. Others referred to it as a demon plague or the apocalypse plague, which I thought was funny since I was trying to prevent the end of the world. It did what had to be done. The population of the planet was far too high to sustain, and they were unwilling to make the slightest changes to reduce the population or at least use more sustainable models for living. No! The numbers had to be reduced. My virus eliminated nearly 90% of the planet's population. Completely indiscriminately, I assure you. I didn't target this group or that. There was no malice. It just had to be done. What happened to the survivors, I failed to predict, I confess. Of course, I knew there would be squabbles among those remaining, what with resources becoming limited as society completely fell apart. In time, groups banded together to survive in any way they could, often isolating themselves from the rest of the world out of fear and mistrust. I'd like to say that evolution simply took the different groups off in different directions, But I'm afraid that it was my virus that gave rise to the changes in the peoples. It made their genetic structures more susceptible to change. The actual physical changes, I believe, were sculpted almost completely by their environments, but the impetus was mine. Seeking to avoid any future viral outbreaks, one large group moved underground, into the numerous subterranean military complexes that dotted the globe in that era. But just as humanity had done in the past, their numbers increased, forcing them to expand their complexes as well. After several millennia, their tunnels crisscrossed the entire stratus of the continent. Tunneling through the earth for all those generations made them shorter and more muscular, which is why they came to be called dwarves. That's about as far as the resemblance to their storybook counterparts goes. Lack of sunlight caused them to become albinos, with chalky skin given easily to sunburns and eyes sensitive enough to warrant squinting at a full moon. They were selfish hoarding brutes, bearing all the technology they salvaged far underground. In the end, they became hardly more than midnight marauders coming out of their holes to steal what resources they lacked. They worry me at times, but their fear has always made them somewhat easily controlled. The fishers were obviously those that took to the waters, settling on small islands in coastal areas, but spending most of their time sailing the seas, fishing, and fighting off the various water monsters that have sprung up in the deep. These seafaring folk are the ones that look the most like the humans of my time, aside from the webbed fingers and toes, of course. They're a swarthy, brown-skinned people with curly mops of hair and a seemingly suicidal sense of adventure. Unpredictable and uncontrollable, they have often been a thorn in my side, but apart from that, I quite like them. They have very free spirits. The tillers were those who held to the land and its ability to sustain life. Yearning for a simpler life, they abandoned technology, preferring to do everything by hand. They grew larger, bearing the burden of clearing the land and tilling their fields. Their skin grew thick and rough, more akin to grayish-brown tree bark than skin. Today you know them as the gentle 10-foot giants that tend their lands in as much peace as they can find. Not really that much of conversationalists, but good people. Being farmers, the people that evolved into the tillers kept dogs and cats as pets. Also affected by my virus, these pets evolved over time as well. The cats, striving to be more like humans, grew larger and sprouted arms. They became the keeper of the herds, and thus came to be known as herdsmen. Over time, they became more nomadic, following their cattle across the vast plains, seeing to the well-being of the herd and chasing off rogue predators. Looking at them now, it would be easier to believe that they had evolved from some big game cat of my time than from house cats. Their lower bodies do in fact look strikingly similar to that of a lion from my era, with 4 fur-covered legs and a tail. Their upper torsos, however, evolved to look distinctly human, aside from the fur, of course. And in true feline fashion, that fur comes in a riot of various colors and patterns. The dogs, being the pinnacle of evolution, remain relatively unchanged over the years. And in an amusing twist on the old stereotype, they became bonded with the herdsmen who had once been their greatest rivals. Then, of course, you have my personal favorites, the elves. Certainly, they aren't the elves from my childhood storybooks, but they're close. These were the rogues and brigands that took to the deep forest after, well, just after, they became smaller, more agile, and extremely elusive from years of hiding amongst the limbs of the trees and sneaking around to steal from both the tillers and fishers alike. The childlike elves, with their delicately cupped ears, were similar enough to their pointy-eared monikers to endear themselves to me early on, despite their pilfering proclivities. The elves, unlike the dwarves, developed an ingrained distrust for technology, keeping only a meager cache hidden deep in the forests. I must admit, a fair share of their hoard consists of things I've given them over the centuries in gratitude for services rendered. Like I said, they're my favorites. For the most part, I've kept to myself all these long years. It goes without saying that I developed a cure to protect myself against the plague before releasing it, but the side effects of the vaccine were something else that I never could have predicted. I stopped aging. In fact, Some of the ailments of age I had at the time faded away shortly thereafter. That's right. In developing a counter-agent to my virus, I basically discovered the secret to eternal youth. Ironic, isn't it? Sometimes I'm not sure if the bigger curse was the disease or the cure. I've found that immortality can be downright depressing at times. Being a forward thinker, I planned ahead before unleashing my solution. There were old, abandoned missile silos that were for sale around the world, but they weren't cheap. I knew that I'd never be able to scrape up enough to buy one, so I had to resort to less honest means. Many of these silos had minimum security, trusting mainly to electronic locks on yard-thick steel doors to keep people out. It took me 3 months to hack into the computer the first time I entered the missile silo I was to claim as my home. It took me another whole year of remodeling and laying in provisions until I was ready to disseminate my virus. By then, I had completely transformed my new abode into a self-sustainable microcosm. I've even managed to maintain several species from my youth, completely unrecognizable from their current decedents. I am not sure I would find life worth living without cows' milk to drink. I've spent uncounted millennia hidden away in my little sanctum, venturing out every few hundred years or so to check on the world's progress and make any needed adjustments. I recorded all of my surface ventures into countless volumes. I have bookcases loaded with my accounts, but I think now that they all pale in comparison with this particular visit to the surface. In this, I'll let you be the judge. Your savior, Valen.
Check out the Confessions of a Genocidal Madman Savior by Rick and Alice Valentine. Available now on Amazon.com.